I'm Scott Miller, and this is my life living in Nicaragua. I've been an expat here for a number of years, and now I'm a full immigrant. If you don't know what those are, we got videos that explain the differences because we're very proud of having moved up to immigration status here. But I got a note today in a discussion because I showed a bit of riding one of the interlocales, one of the buses that go between the cities, and the person said that they were told that the buses here were dangerous. They should avoid them, and they ended up spending the entire time that they lived in Nicaragua completely avoiding the buses and never experienced one, except for things like the Tika bus, which is kind of a different animal. That's not what we generally mean by buses here, and most people understand that. That is an international bus that's like a big Greyhound style thing, very luxurious, goes between countries. That's not what we're talking about here in Nicaragua. Generally, we're talking about the buses that go between the cities or between neighborhoods or around town and so forth. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what you can expect from safety on the buses, whether it's not something you want to do or should do. And in the future, we'll do more riding the buses to show more of that. If you haven't seen any of me riding buses, I've shown many times on different videos how to do it, where I like to go, what kind of food I like to eat on the bus, and so forth. So we got plenty of that information. We're going to talk about safety because we don't normally address this in the context of the buses here. So we're going to talk about that right after the bump. So first things first, Nicaraguans ride buses. Buses are a part of everyday life here in Nicaragua. It's a very important part of the culture, and I think if you're going to be living here or visiting here, it's important in general to actually put in some time on the buses because it helps you understand how things work, and there's a lot of advantages to be able to use the buses. I have been using them since I first got here, and I'm very happy to use them on a regular basis. There are some places that I avoid the buses because I find them very confusing, not because I'm afraid to use them, but because they're just complex, and I'm trying to go to different places, and sometimes you have to make connections, and as someone who doesn't speak Spanish perfectly and I don't know all the neighborhoods of the cities that I'm sometimes in, sometimes those buses can be problematic. And I did this in Germany, ended up on the wrong bus and ended up very far away from where I needed to go and just kicked off the bus with no further transportation back and ended up walking miles and miles through the German countryside to get back to the city that I had come from, all because I got on apparently the wrong bus, or maybe the right bus going the wrong way. I still don't know. But here in Nicaragua, buses are just part of everyday life and you gotta be doing it. And one of the things that stood out in the particular note that I got is that he said he was told by people that they would never ride the bus, it was dangerous and you shouldn't do it. It's important to understand that here in Nicaragua, really the only people that avoid the buses are the super elite. Even very high-ranking government officials will get on the bus without thinking twice. You're talking about extremely rich, affluent, and what we call Managua Premium are likely to avoid riding buses. Now, for convenience sake, there are people who have cars, obviously, and many people just like riding in cars rather than taking a bus. It totally makes sense. There's lots of situations where I'd like to have the flexibility of my own car, and quite often when you see me in cars, it's because I'm filming and so forth, or I'm riding with somebody, and it is difficult to film on a bus. It can be uncomfortable because there's other people there and you're filming them. They may not want you to do that, or you just feel weird, or you don't want to have a whole bunch of equipment because often I'm doing like filming with a lot of cameras and I don't want to take those on the bus. So there's a lot of situations where I'm using cars for practicality reasons. But if just me and I'm just going somewhere and I do actually really enjoy taking the buses. It's more fuel efficient, it's more cost efficient, it's often faster, and it's just nice being a little bit more involved with the culture. But it is nice to know how cheap it is. So just as an example, I did this on the UCA bus the other day, the interlocale from León to Managua, and it's about $2.10 to go from León all the way to the capital. That's a pretty long way on a comfy little bus for very little money. That really shows how valuable that is. And if you don't do that, if you're taking a car and you're paying for having an actual car, needing to have a license, deal with all that stuff, paying for gas, you're going to spend way more than $2 and you're going to have to do the driving, and it's probably going to take you longer because the interlocales move so quickly and are never stopped by the police. They go right through the checkpoints. You have to worry about any of that stuff. It makes life very convenient in many ways. So if you're ever trying to figure out how you can live frugally in Nicaragua, even if you have plenty of money, but you want to be a little bit more cautious with it and not throw it away for no reason, many expats move to the country, or even immigrants like me, end up in a situation where you may consider just not having a car because the public transportation system here is excellent. It is very cheap and gets you anywhere in the country with a little bit of know-how, certainly. And why bother with all the overhead and financial and mental of having a car when you can have someone else drive you for practically free all over the country. It's a great option. A lot of people just stick with that and use taxis when they need a little bit more flexibility. So let's talk about safety, because there's three aspects of safety, and these are important to consider because different people use these terms differently. So first of all, Nicaraguan safety. Nicaraguans have a tendency to refer to safety in terms of theft. They're not talking about you being knifed or beat up. They're talking about someone nicking your purse or picking your pocket, or, you know, you fall asleep with something in your lap, maybe someone takes it. If you leave something behind on the bus, what are the chances it's going to be there when you get back, and so forth. This is generally how Nicaraguans perceive of safety, things that for North Americans generally does not mean safety. We don't use that term to mean those things. On some of the buses, specifically the chicken buses and the city buses, these are relatively large buses. They could be new, could be old. Chicken ones are old. The new municipal buses are quite nice and new, but they tend to be very crowded because they're just packed with people and they're moving through the city. So on those, which are really cheap, these are the absolute cheapest of the buses. People are like sardines on there, and you do get people who are either just very opportunistic looking for things, and there are people who get onto those buses for the purpose of you know, picking pockets or whatever, and they're really on the lookout for that. Now, it's pretty easy to protect against these in most cases, right? Have pockets that zip, don't put things in pockets you can't get to, you know, use a fanny pack, cross-body bag, something like that. Keep things close to yourself. Yeah, it would be nice if we didn't have to go through those extra measures, but realistically, anytime you're in a city, if you're in the United States, if you're in Europe, you got to do the same thing, right? Europe, when you're on the bus in Germany, they're like, watch out for pickpockets. They're everywhere. Like, remember, people pick your pockets, right? And that's just something that happens in crowded areas. So you can reduce the risk of that by just protecting yourself a little bit. I've never known anyone to have something stolen on one of the buses that they didn't leave it exposed. I do know people who took their glasses off, fell asleep with it in their lap, and woke up without their glasses because someone just quietly took them. They didn't go into a pocket. They didn't do anything. They just took them off their lap and the person was asleep. Yes, even glasses will get stolen. No one's going to steal them off of your face. No one's going to rip your bag open. It's very unlikely. I have heard stories of some people getting on and actually robbing a bus. But for the number of buses that go around the country, one, it was only a story, not verified. I'm sure it's probably true. It's got to happen at times. But for the number of buses that go around the country, this is a not very common occurrence. It's also a little bit difficult to do so because a bus is moving and can contact the police. So if you're on a bus and you're robbing someone and they manage to text the police can be waiting for where the bus stops. So it's the kind of thing that's not the most likely scenario, just because it does carry a bit of risk for someone who's robbing you versus being on the street where someone can just run away. They're trapped inside that bus, and so that's just a potential problem for the robbers. So I really don't worry about that too much, but you do want to be cautious. And if you're doing it every day, or you have lots of bags, you're like a backpacker, and all your earthly belongings are on your lap, that makes it a lot more risky. There's more to be stolen, and it's harder for you to keep track of everything. I understand. So when we're talking about those kinds of buses, we do have that type of risk. If you're on something, if you're on the small shuttles known as the interlocales, these are like the Toyota High Ace vans that zip around the country. These go all over the place. They're probably more popular than the chicken buses, in my opinion. That's what they seem to be. Anyway, these are really nice. They pretty much go point to point. They don't stop all along the way picking people up and dropping them off, which makes them a lot more efficient. Unless you're along the path, then you have to use the chicken bus to at least get to a point where you can get to the UCA bus. The UCA buses get you in sometimes as little as half the time as taking the chicken bus, and they hold between 15 and 17 people. Because they go point to point and people aren't getting on and getting off with any regularity, getting even pickpocketed or robbed on them, extremely unlikely. It's not like a bus where people are moving past you in the aisles all the time. You have your own little seat, you're on a van. It's very difficult for that to happen. If you fall asleep, yes, but you'd wake up and it's one of just a couple people around you. Every single person would see someone steal something from you. If they did, it's a completely different experience. So I've never been in a position where I worried at all about being on the interlocales. I will even put my bags on there with money in them, with cameras in them, all kinds of things. I'll just put them on a seat and stand a little ways away. I'm not necessarily looking at them. I'm not going far away. I'm not giving someone a chance to run up to the bus, reach in, grab it, run away from it. That I'm not going to let them do. But the people who are on the bus, I'm not worried about them rummaging in my stuff. I'm not worried. I'm not leaving, you know, like $1 million things. I'm not leaving my cell phone in there, but most things I'm not worried about it. Like, people are just not going to do that. It's very safe. I have dropped my phone on a bus, left it for like 30 minutes, woke up, realized I didn't have it. Every person on the bus went searching for it, found it, and gave it back to me, right? Not something that I would worry about. The UCA buses are extremely safe. for that type of thing. Now, that is the first type of safety. That is the stuff you can protect against, you don't have to worry about. The second bit of safety is physical safety. Someone's going to do violent crime. I've never heard so much as a rumor of there being violent crime on the UCA buses, like the interlocales. That's just not a thing. And if you ride one, you'll instantly feel like, oh yeah, how would this happen? I mean, it could, but it's not a kind of situation where you would expect violent crime. Like I said, on the chicken buses, I've heard stories that there have been, robberies on them. I've never heard of anyone getting hurt, but the threat of being hurt certainly could exist. It's not something that I would be concerned about. There are so many people riding so many buses every day that you would have to hear those stories quite often to assume that it was statistically realistic. That could happen anywhere, so at some point you can't just take, well, there's this one story of this one time. That's a terrible way to keep yourself safe. They'll lead you to doing dangerous things just because you're trying to avoid a what if that is not statistically likely, and then putting yourself into a thing where you didn't ask what if, but statistically something is dangerous. So violent crime on the bus is really not something to be concerned about. Nicaraguans don't normally refer to violent crime when they're talking about safety. It's just not something that Nicaraguans generally have to worry about. It's such a safe country. So that is a perspective thing that often when Nicaraguans, or essentially always, when Nicaraguans are warning me about safety, they don't mean what we mean as safety. They just mean that if you leave your Nintendo Switch behind on the seat, when you come back, it's going to be gone. No one's going to save it for you because it's worth a lot of money and they're going to go use it or fence it, which makes sense. So have that context, understand that's really not what they're talking about in almost all cases. It's not the kind of things that North Americans would avoid using the buses because of. Now, type 3 of safety. This has to do with the driving quality. Chicken buses typically move pretty slow and they're pretty big. If they are to have an accident, they normally are the winners. It would be rare for them not to be. If they hit a semi or such, of course, it's going to be really bad. But in general, they're pretty good. And we don't have high bridges. So a lot of the risks that you see in a lot of countries, like in the mountains with those kinds of buses, we don't have those risks. The risks where they might go into a ditch or get stuck or blow out a tire or break down, but not that they are going to do something that causes you bodily harm. The city buses, very similar. They're bumping things all the time, but not causing damage, not putting you at risk inside the bus. The one that is worth noting is the interlocales. These are the small vans, like I mentioned, the UCAs. They move very quickly and they are small. If they are to have accidents, they are going to get potentially clobbered. They are often much smaller than other vehicles on the road. If they're hitting a tractor, they're hitting a semi, they're hitting a chicken bus, they are going to pretty much dissolve from the impact because they're just passenger vans. So these you do need to be a little bit more wary of, that yes, they do have a fairly high accident rate. People do ride, they go every few minutes all over the country. So the number of them that are driving at incredibly high speeds and often quite recklessly actually do pretty well. But it's so much that we do hear about accidents on a semi-regular basis. And there are potentially injuries and fatalities from those. So that could be where someone is talking about safety. That is the actual type of safety of any of these that would be potentially a concern. But still, statistically, they are pretty safe. It's, there's so many of them going so often that, of course, you have to have a certain number of stories of traffic accidents. Anytime you have a lot of traffic, you are eventually going to have a traffic accident. So it is something to just be aware, but there's safer parts of the van to sit in for sure. Make sure you sit towards the back. Make sure you are behind a seat. There's a lot of seats that have open space in front of them. Sitting in the front in the passenger seat, generally okay, but sitting in the jump seat in the middle, terrible idea from safety perspective. So you can do some stuff to protect yourself a lot. If you have a big bag, put it on your lap. That's going to an extreme, but you often have to do that anyway. So not a big deal. And if you ride during the day in bright daylight, you're much more likely to be safe. It's the twilight ones that are more likely to experience problems and so forth. But in general, it's really not a thing to worry about under normal circumstances. I would never think twice about going with my family on them because, you're taking a certain amount of risk getting into a car or anything anytime either way. So these are probably just as safe or potentially safer than being in a car. It just feels less safe because you're not the one in control of the driving, but those drivers do this professionally all day long. They are pretty fast and reckless. It is worth noting that they do often drive very, very quickly. But I would, in general, have no hesitance in using the buses here, and I do all the time. And I really enjoy it in many cases. And I talk about that it's a fun way to see the country, and it makes it so inexpensive. It's so accessible. It makes it that you don't have to have a car. And again, A lot of the busing gets very confusing, and if you're doing this on a vacation, sure, may not make sense for you. I do often tell people who are on vacation that they may want to take the UCA just because it's a great experience and exposes them to a bit of Nicaragua that a lot of people on vacation don't get to see, and it does help you understand the culture a little bit and makes it all feel so much just easier and fun. So maybe give that a try. And that is what I ride all the time. The only one that I mentioned as having any kind of safety concern is the one that I use every time. That's the one I'm constantly filming because it's so convenient for me. For $2.10 to go from Leon to the capital, or for just maybe like about $3, I think I can go to Granada. And it's so rapid and just I don't have to have a car tied up. No one has to drive me. What a wonderful way to get around the country. And in most cases, not here in Leon, but Managua drops you off pretty much downtown. Granada puts you right on the square. It doesn't get too much better than that. So you're in a great position to explore those cities. So if you're coming to Nicaragua, absolutely do not be afraid of the buses. Take the time to at least ride a little bit. And if someone is like, well, we have the options of doing a bus, you have someone to guide you, tell you where to go, just do the buses, right? Protect your stuff, be alert, don't be a silly tourist and get distracted. And with a tiny bit of self-awareness, you will find that the bus experience is a really good one. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlMiller. I'll put the link up above. We also have a join button down there. We love it when you guys send in comments and questions. So get down in the comment section and say hello, if nothing else, but definitely ask your questions or let us know what your experiences are here or other places, what you're interested in. Are you coming down the expat journey yourself? Are you living in Nicaragua or whatever? We got all kinds of information in the show notes, how to join our expat community on WhatsApp, how to send in videos of yourself to put yourself on the show, other resources that we have, other channels that we have, all kinds of great stuff. We don't sell anything, so feel free to explore without feeling like you're going into some store trying to get you to buy some, checklist on how to be an expat or anything like that. We don't do that kind of stuff here. My email's even down there if you want to contact me. Please share this with people, hit like, and do all those things. I will see all of you tomorrow.